On June 6, 1944, the English Channel lay cold and dark, 23 kilometers off the French coast. Salt spray whipped across the bow of landing craft tank 2273 as Lieutenant Dean Rockwell held the radio handset, his knuckles white against the plastic. Through the pre-dawn gloom, he could count the shapes of 32 amphibious Sherman tanks rising and falling with the churning sea. Their canvas screens stuck up from the hulls like medieval siege towers silhouetted against the horizon line. The message crackled through. Task Force O confirmed at 0630 hours. Captain Ned Elder of the 743 Tank Battalion stood studying the 5-foot swells through his binoculars. Beach obstacles, heavy fortifications still standing. He made a decision in those churning waters that would end up saving hundreds of lives. The DD tanks wouldn't swim. They would stay aboard their landing craft all the way to the beach. What none of them realized in that moment was that this single choice, made while the waves tossed the fleet around, would set off the most devastating armored breakthrough the entire European campaign would ever see. The hedgerows of France had already taught German forces something bitter. Their tigers and panthers were apex predators in those tight spaces. Superior armor, devastating 88mm guns, mechanical precision that made them nearly unstoppable when dug in defensively. The Wehrmacht had built an armored doctrine that created kill zones across the Norman countryside. Hundreds of hidden positions, anti-tank guns sighted on every approach, tank traps and obstacles that would channel Allied armor straight into predetermined killing fields. The Sherman tank cut through the English Channel at 4 knots, its Chrysler engine straining against 33 tons of steel and American determination. With its duplex drive system fitted, each M4A4 Sherman displaced enough water to flood an entire small building. Staff Sergeant Paul Reagan stood in the commander's hatch of his tank aboard LCT 600, studying the situation ahead. His tank carried 90 rounds of 75mm ammunition, nearly 5,000 rounds of .30 caliber machine gun ammunition, and the hopes riding on this entire amphibious assault. The Sherman represented American industrial thinking at its most practical. Unlike the German Tiger, which cost 250,000 Reichsmarks and demanded specialized maintenance, the Sherman could be mass-produced, shipped across oceans, and kept running by farm boys from Kansas using basic tools. Chrysler's Detroit tank arsenal alone was pushing out over 400 Shermans every single month by 1944. The mathematics were stark and compelling. Germany struggled to produce 100 Tigers monthly, while American factories churned out more than 2,000 Shermans per month at peak. Add in mechanical reliability, fuel efficiency, and ease of repair, and the equation became overwhelming. Tank Commander William Folkestad had trained with the 743 Tank Battalion out at Camp Laguna, Arizona. A veteran who would later earn a Silver Star and Purple Heart, Folkestad understood that victory in mechanized warfare wasn't about thick armor or big gun calibers. It was about putting steel on target, keeping the offensive going, and most importantly, adapting to what the battlefield threw at you faster than the enemy could react. A Panther tank, number 424, serving with the 2nd Panzer Division, carried 89 rounds for its long-barreled 75mm gun and 4,200 rounds of machine gun ammunition. Its frontal armor measured 100mm thick, sloped at 55 degrees, creating an effective thickness of 140mm. American 75mm guns couldn't punch through it beyond 100 meters. The Panther displaced 45 tons, powered by a Maybach engine that consumed fuel at rates that would have horrified American logistics officers. It achieved roughly 1 mile per gallon on roads, half that cross-country. But positioned down in a Norman hedgerow with interlocking fields of fire, the Panther didn't need to move. It only needed to kill. The German defensive positions at Omaha Beach represented 2 years of fortification work. Widerstands Nest 62, overlooking Easy Red Sector, held multiple machine gun positions, a 50mm anti-tank gun, and mortar pits. Heinrich Severloh, manning an MG-42 machine gun, would later claim to have fired over 12,000 rounds, a figure historians consider greatly exaggerated given the physical impossibility and the actual casualty counts. The kill zones were mathematically perfect. Overlapping fields of fire meant no dead space where attackers could find cover. Pre-registered artillery coordinates meant mortars could drop shells anywhere on the beach within 30 seconds of target identification. At 0550 on June 6, Captain Elder aboard LCT 2037 observed the sea state through spray-soaked binoculars. Waves measured 5 to 6 feet, wind force 18 knots from the west. The DD tank's canvas screens, designed for 3-foot seas, would collapse in conditions like these. Of the 64 Sherman DD tanks scheduled to swim ashore at Omaha Beach, only 29 would attempt it. Of those 29 belonging to the 741 Tank Battalion on the eastern sectors, 27 would sink in the cold waters of the English Channel. But Elder's 743rd Tank Battalion would not launch their tanks into the water. His 32 DD tanks, plus support vehicles, would ride their LCTs directly onto dog green and dog red beaches. It meant exposing the thin-skinned landing craft to direct fire, but watching his tanks disappear beneath the waves was worse. The mathematics were unforgiving. Risk the landing craft and their naval crews, or lose the tanks and their army crews before they fired a single shot. At 0615, the naval bombardment began. USS Texas fired 14-inch shells at the bluffs above Omaha. USS Arkansas added 12-inch rounds. Smaller destroyers crept within 1,000 yards of the beach, firing directly at visible fortifications. The bombardment was supposed to last 40 minutes, pulverizing German positions before the first wave hit the sand. In reality, most shells overshot their targets. Low clouds forced the heavy bombers to release their payloads late. They fell harmlessly in the fields behind the beach. Of 446 B-24 Liberators that attacked Omaha Beach, not one bomb fell on the beach itself. The Sherman's first combat action at Omaha came at 0629, 1 minute before H hour. Company A of the 743 Tank Battalion, fitted with deep wading equipment, rolled directly off their LCTs into 4 feet of water. These tanks had been waterproofed with special kits. Their exhausts extended with improvised stacks that allowed them to wade through 6 feet of water. The first tanks hit the beach with tracks grinding against the shingle as 75mm guns swung toward the bluffs. The initial German response was devastating. An 88mm anti-tank gun in WN-61 fired 8 rounds in 90 seconds. 3 Shermans exploded. Their 75mm ammunition cooked off in spectacular fireballs visible from the naval vessels offshore. Machine gun fire sparked off tank hulls like hellish rain. Mortars walked their way across the beach, bracketing tanks with methodical precision. But the Shermans kept coming. By 0740, tanks were on Omaha Beach. Some burned already, others threw tracks on the obstacles or bogged down in the shingle. But those still operational began engaging German positions with direct fire. The psychological impact was immediate. German infantry trained to expect an infantry assault found themselves facing armor that could absorb machine gun fire and respond with high explosive shells. Technical Sergeant John Duquan of the 743rd Tank Battalion had landed in the second wave at 0640. His tank immediately took 2 hits from a 50mm anti-tank gun, both rounds penetrating the hull but missing critical components. Duquan's driver, Private First Class Howard Froebel, drove directly at the German position while the gunner pumped 5 rounds of high explosive into the fortification. The anti-tank gun fell silent. This became the pattern. Individual tank commanders, unable to communicate by radio, saltwater had destroyed most sets, fought private wars against specific German positions. A Sherman would absorb multiple hits from smaller caliber weapons, while methodically destroying machine gun nests with its 75mm gun and bow-mounted .30 caliber machine gun. The bow gunner position, unique to American tanks, proved invaluable for suppressing German infantry, while the main gun engaged hardened positions. By 0730, the crisis at Omaha Beach was evident to naval observers. General Omar Bradley, watching from USS Augusta, considered diverting follow-up waves to Utah Beach. The 16th Infantry Regiment had taken catastrophic casualties. Company A had ceased to exist as a fighting unit. Company E was down to 23 men from 180. The beach was littered with destroyed equipment and wounded men seeking cover behind German obstacles. But the tanks were making a difference. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Paloga, commanding the 743 Tank Battalion's Company C, directed his tanks to engage the fortifications at Lemuel and the Draw. Using a technique developed in training, tanks would fire white phosphorus rounds to mark targets, then follow with high explosive. The white phosphorus had an additional effect. Its burning particles penetrated vision slits and gun ports, forcing defenders to abandon their positions. At 08:15, Widerstands Nest 66 reported to German Sector Command. Enemy tanks on beach. Infantry decimated, but tanks advancing. Request immediate anti-tank support. The response was sobering. No mobile reserves were available. The 352nd Infantry Division's anti-tank battalion was positioned 10 miles inland, held back by Field Marshal Rommel's order to defend against expected airborne landings. The beach defenders would have to hold with what they had. The Shermans' mechanical simplicity now proved decisive. Tank Barbara of Company B, 743 Tank Battalion, commanded by Sergeant Walter Basker, took 7 hits from various weapons in the first hour. The tank lost 2 bogie wheels, had its turret traverse mechanism damaged, and suffered a fuel leak. But the crew made field repairs using basic tools and spare parts carried on the tank. By Aero 900, Barbara was back in action, engaging German positions at Vierville Draw. This was the Sherman's great advantage. A damaged Tiger or Panther required specialized recovery vehicles and trained mechanics. A Sherman could be repaired by its crew using parts cannibalized from knocked-out tanks. Throughout D-Day, Sherman crews performed miracles of field maintenance. Tracks were replaced under fire. Gun barrels damaged by shell hits were swapped in 20 minutes. Engines that should have required depot-level maintenance were coaxed back to life with improvisation and determination. At 08:45, the first German armor appeared. 2 Sturmgeschütz, the 3rd assault guns from the 3AV-52 Infantry Division's Assault Gun Battalion, engaged the Shermans at 800 meters. Their 75mm Stuck guns could penetrate Sherman armor at that range, but the American tanks possessed a crucial advantage: numbers. For every German assault gun, there were 5 Shermans. The Stugs managed to destroy 2 Shermans before being overwhelmed by concentrated fire from multiple tanks. By 0900, combat engineers supported by tanks had blown gaps in the seawall at Easy Red sector. Shermans began moving off the beach, engaging German positions from the flank. This was the breakthrough moment. German defensive doctrine depended on keeping attackers pinned on the beach. Once armor penetrated inland, the entire defensive system began to unravel. Private First Class Charles Lombardo of the 741st Tank Battalion had survived the swim to shore in one of only 2 DD tanks that made it. His tank, waterlogged and barely functional, managed to engage and destroy a concrete bunker at 100 meters with 5 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition, followed by high explosive. The bunker had been holding up the advance of an entire infantry company. With its destruction, 150 infantrymen were able to move off the beach. The German response to the armored breakthrough followed established doctrine. Panzerfaust teams were deployed to establish close-range ambushes. The Panzerfaust, a single-shot anti-tank weapon, could penetrate 200 millimeters of armor at 30 meters. In the bocage country behind Omaha Beach, every hedgerow could conceal a Panzerfaust team. But the Americans had learned from the disasters at Kasserine Pass and Sicily. Infantry-tank cooperation had been drilled relentlessly. Every Sherman advancing inland had infantry walking alongside, checking hedgerows and buildings for anti-tank teams. In the days following D-Day, German armor would arrive in force. Panthers from the 2nd Panzer Division and Tigers from the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion would engage American tanks near Caen and Villers-Bocage. The pattern of these engagements would prove consistent. German tanks were individually superior, but American tactics emphasized fire and maneuver. While one Sherman platoon engaged frontally, another would maneuver for flank shots. The mathematics were brutal but effective. Trading 3 Shermans for 1 Panther was considered acceptable when America was producing 30 Shermans for every Panther Germany built. By noon on D-Day, 51 Sherman tanks were operational on Omaha Beach and its immediate inland areas. They had suffered terrible losses, 40% knocked out or disabled, but they had achieved their mission. The beach was secured, follow-up waves were landing without catastrophic casualties. Most critically, the psychological impact on German forces was decisive. The myth of impregnable Atlantic wall defenses had been shattered. At 352nd Infantry Division headquarters, General Dietrich Kreis received fragmentary reports throughout the morning. American tanks overwhelming beach defenses, wider stands nest positions falling, enemy armor advancing on Colleville. By 1300, Kreis understood that Omaha Beach was lost. Without armor reserves to counter the American tanks, his infantry could only conduct a fighting withdrawal. The Shermans' impact extended beyond direct combat. Their presence allowed engineers to clear obstacles without being massacred by machine gun fire. Their 75mm guns could engage fortifications that naval gunfire couldn't reach. Most importantly, their psychological effect on American infantry was transformative. Soldiers who had been paralyzed on the beach began advancing once they saw tanks moving forward. Technical innovations implemented for D-Day proved their worth. The deep wading equipment developed in secrecy and tested in Scotland allowed tanks to land in deeper water and avoid the worst obstacle belts. Waterproofed ammunition storage prevented catastrophic explosions when tanks were hit. Most importantly, the addition of armored telephones on tank rear decks allowed infantry to communicate with tank crews despite the loss of radios. By 1400 on D-Day, American tanks were pushing inland toward their D-Day objectives. The advance was slower than planned. Hedgerows that looked like simple field boundaries on aerial photos proved to be formidable obstacles. These ancient earth and stone walls, some dating to Roman times, were 3 to 4 feet thick at the base, topped with dense hedge growth and fronted by drainage ditches. Tanks attempting to climb over exposed their thin belly armor to anti-tank fire. But American ingenuity was already at work. Sergeant Curtis Kuhn of the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron had noticed that German beach obstacles, steel hedgehogs designed to rip holes in landing craft, could be cut up and welded to tank bows as hedge-cutting devices. Within hours of landing, maintenance crews were modifying tanks with these improvised hedge cutters. A soldier from Tennessee named Roberts had suggested the idea. Why don't we get some steel and put it on the front of the tank and cut through these hedges? Kuhn had recognized the brilliance in this simple observation. The German High Command's response to the Normandy landings was hampered by confusion and Hitler's personal intervention. The Führer, convinced that Normandy was a feint and the real invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais, refused to release the strategic armor reserve. The 2nd SS Panzer Division sat roughly 130 miles from Normandy when the order finally came through late that afternoon. By the time their columns rumbled toward the coast, American armor had already established solid defensive positions, blocking every major route into the beachhead. At 4 in the afternoon on D-Day, soldiers from Company B of the 743rd Tank Battalion spotted movement ahead. Their first Tiger tank appeared near the village of 4 minutes, and what happened next would become a masterclass in tactical thinking under fire. That Tiger belonged to the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion, sent forward from its position near Caen to push back the American advance and reclaim the initiative. The tank commander was SS Hauptsturmführer Helm Müller, a hardened veteran whose service in Russia had left him skilled and scarred. His Tiger had already claimed 19 Soviet T-34s across multiple engagements. The gun mounted on his turret, an 88mm monster, could punch through Sherman armor from 2,000 meters away. That range meant the Americans would be outgunned from the start. Yet what unfolded revealed how thoroughly American tankers had learned to adapt. Rather than charging straight at the Tiger, the Sherman platoon leader, Lieutenant James Johnson, made a different choice. He ordered smoke rounds fired immediately, thick clouds billowing up to blind the German gunners' optics. While one Sherman kept the Germans' attention pinned with suppressing fire from the front, 3 others rolled fast toward a small orchard off to the flank. They moved low, engines straining, keeping trees and terrain between themselves and that deadly 88. Müller's gunner stayed locked on the Sherman firing from the front, convinced that was the only threat. By the time spotters yelled warnings about movement to the side, it was too late. The three Shermans had closed to just 200 meters. Their 75mm guns barked in succession, and 5 rounds tore into the Tiger's engine compartment at point-blank range. The massive steel beast shuddered violently, black smoke pouring from every vent along its rear deck and sides. Flames started climbing up toward the turret. Miller's crew bailed out fast, dropping to the ground as their tank became an inferno. But something more important than that single destroyed tank rippled through German command that afternoon. If Tigers could be killed by Shermans, what hope remained for exposed infantrymen? Reports started flowing back to German headquarters, each one grimmer than the last. Tank strength overwhelming. Multiple Tiger losses and Panther casualties. Infantry units retreating from armored columns. The situation sounded catastrophic. The reality was considerably more complicated. For every clever flanking attack that worked, Shermans paid terrible prices in head-to-head exchanges. The Americans absorbed those losses because they had to, because they had chosen a different path in tank design. The Sherman wasn't built to be perfect. It was built to be adequate and producible. 2 Shermans could fit where a single Tiger went aboard standard Liberty ships. Maintenance crews consisting of conscripts with just 3 months of training could keep them running. Most critically, they could be built in numbers that made casualties survivable. By evening on D-Day, the 743rd and 741st Tank Battalions had strung a continuous line of armor all the way from Omaha Beach inland. They'd lost 48 tanks, with 45 crew members killed and 60 wounded. Yet they'd managed to get 58 operational tanks ashore and shattered the Atlantic Wall itself. German losses were harder to calculate precisely, but included multiple fortified positions obliterated, 3 assault guns destroyed, 1 Tiger knocked out, 3 Panthers burning, hundreds of infantrymen cut down or scattered. The technological lessons became obvious almost immediately. The Sherman's 75mm gun couldn't penetrate heavy German armor when hitting it straight on, but it devastated fortifications and infantry. More surprising was the tank's reliability under actual combat conditions. Despite saltwater immersion, beach obstacles, and intense fighting, 70% of Shermans that reached shore were still operational when the sun set. Compare that to the 6 Tiger IIs that eventually made it to Normandy by July. 5 of them broke down before ever reaching combat. American maintenance crews worked through the night of June 6th into 7th, using acetylene torches to slice up German beach obstacles into manageable pieces, then welding crude but effective hedge cutters onto Sherman bows. The devices looked like metal prongs extending forward. By dawn on June 7th, 15 tanks had these modifications. Within a week, 60% of American tanks in Normandy carried them, and soldiers started calling them Rhino devices because those forward prongs resembled rhino horns. The German 352nd Infantry Division's war diary for June 7th captured the shifting reality. Enemy tank attacks supported by massive artillery have made defensive positions untenable. Withdrawal to 2nd Defensive Line authorized. This represented nothing less than a fundamental shift in German defensive thinking. The Atlantic Wall hadn't simply been breached. It had been rendered completely obsolete by American armor. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, commanding 1st Army, would later write about what he witnessed. The tanks saved Omaha Beach. Without them, we would have been thrown back into the sea. That wasn't exaggeration or battlefield poetry. The 29 infantry companies assaulting Omaha Beach suffered 50% casualties. The 2 tank battalions, despite heavy losses, maintained the ability to attack throughout the entire day. Their presence transformed what could have been disaster into a costly victory that held. The weeks following D-Day revealed the full scope of American armored warfare doctrine. Operation Cobra, launched on July 25th, showcased everything they'd learned. 3,000 aircraft carpet-bombed German positions. 700 Shermans, 60% equipped with Rhino hedge cutters, punched through the bocage. The breakthrough changed the Normandy stalemate into the kind of mobile warfare American armor was designed for. That Rhino hedge cutter became standard equipment across the force. Within 6 weeks of D-Day, 500 Shermans had been modified with various hedge-cutting devices. The British developed their own version and called them prongs. The innovation spread so rapidly that German intelligence reported by August all enemy tanks now equipped with hedge-breaking devices. Bocage defensive positions no longer tenable. The Panther tank remained technically superior throughout the entire campaign. Its longer 75mm gun could penetrate Sherman armor at distances where the Sherman's gun couldn't touch it. But technical superiority couldn't overcome the brutal mathematics of numerical inferiority, logistical problems, and mechanical breakdowns. A British Operational Research Section study found that in Normandy, Panthers achieved only 37% operational availability, compared to 70% for Shermans. The arithmetic of attrition was merciless and inexorable. Germany produced approximately 6,000 Panthers during the entire war. America produced 49,234 Shermans, with nearly 50,000 total, including all variants. Normandy alone saw over 2,000 Shermans in combat. Even achieving a 3-to-1 kill ratio, which German tanks rarely managed, couldn't stem the tide. For every Panther destroyed, 5 Shermans appeared. For every Tiger lost, 10 Shermans rolled off ships at Normandy's artificial Mulberry harbors. By August 1944, German armored forces in Normandy were effectively annihilated. The 2nd Panzer Division entered combat with 180 tanks and was reduced to 25. The 116th Panzer Division dropped from 120 tanks to nearly nothing. The vaunted 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, could muster only 17 operational tanks from an initial strength of 150. The Falaise Pocket in mid-August delivered the final destruction of German armor in Normandy. Surrounded by British, Canadian, Polish, and American forces, German tank crews abandoned their vehicles and fled on foot. Allied pilots reported roads littered with burning Tigers and Panthers, their crews unable to maintain or fuel these mechanical beasts during the retreat. American losses were severe, too. The 743rd Tank Battalion alone lost 51 tanks totally destroyed during the Normandy campaign, with another 80 requiring major repairs. Crew casualties exceeded 50%. But unlike German losses, American losses got replaced. For every Sherman destroyed, 2 arrived from England. For every crew member killed, 3 replacements were in the pipeline. Tank warfare in the Bocage proved particularly brutal. Average engagement distances ran about 400 meters. At that range, the first shot usually decided everything. Tank crews developed a dark humor to cope. The Sherman lights first time every time, they'd joke, referencing Ronson lighter advertisements. But they also understood their sacrifice was enabling victory. Private First Class Wayne Robinson of Company B, 743rd Tank Battalion, wrote later about his tank Barbara. She wasn't the best tank in the world, the Germans had better. But she was there when we needed her, she took us through hell and got us home. That's all you can ask of a tank or a friend. Technical innovations continued throughout the campaign. The British Sherman Firefly, mounting a 17-pounder gun capable of penetrating Tiger armor at 1,000 meters, began arriving in significant numbers. By August, 1 in every 4 British Sherman was a Firefly. American units received 76mm armed Shermans starting in July, giving improved anti-tank capability, though still inferior to German guns. The real revolution remained tactical rather than technical. American armor doctrine emphasized combined arms, mobility, and overwhelming mass. Tanks didn't operate alone, but as integrated teams including infantry, artillery, engineers, and air support. This systematic approach to warfare proved more decisive than any individual weapon system. German tank commander Otto Carius, who destroyed 150 enemy tanks on the Eastern Front, wrote later, "The Americans understood something we didn't. War isn't about having the best tank. It's about having enough good tanks, fuel to run them, parts to fix them, and men trained to use them. We had the best tanks. They had everything else." Post-war statistical analysis revealed the true story of Normandy tank combat. The average Sherman in combat was hit 1.2 times. Of those hits, 60% resulted in permanent destruction, 20% could be repaired in the field, and 20% required depot-level maintenance. Crew survival rates were surprisingly high at 75%. Sherman crews survived their tank being knocked out partly because of large hatches, partly because of American emphasis on escape training. Panthers showed different patterns. Panthers averaged 2.3 penetrations before destruction, suggesting superior armor protection. But once hit, 80% became permanent losses because crews couldn't recover and repair vehicles during the retreat. Tiger crews had only 45% survival rates when their tanks were destroyed, mainly from ammunition fires and smaller escape hatches. The Normandy campaign transformed American armored warfare forever. Lessons from the bocage spread across Europe. Hedge cutters evolved into dozer blades. Tank infantry phones became standard equipment. Most importantly, the mythology of German armored superiority shattered. American tankers learned they could defeat Tigers and Panthers through superior tactics and teamwork. By late August 1944, as Allied forces poured across France, the strategic picture was clear. Germany had lost not just a battle but the capacity to wage mobile warfare in the West. The cream of panzer forces lay burned out in Norman fields. Experienced crews who'd survived Russia were dead or captured. German training schools couldn't replace such losses. The Sherman would continue attracting criticism from historians focused purely on technical specifications. Its armor was thinner than German tanks. Its gun was less powerful. Its gasoline engine was more flammable than diesel alternatives. In isolation, every criticism held water. But war isn't fought in isolation. The Sherman was part of a system industrial, logistical, and tactical that proved superior. Admiral Bertram Ramsay, Allied naval commander for D-Day, observed later, "The success at Normandy wasn't due to any single weapon or tactic. It was the culmination of Allied industrial might, logistical superiority, and tactical adaptation." The Sherman tank embodied all these qualities, not perfect, but perfectly adequate for the task. The impact extended far beyond World War II. The Sherman's success validated American military doctrine, emphasizing production quantity, mechanical reliability, and tactical flexibility over technical perfection. This philosophy influenced American tank design through the Cold War. The M48 Patton, M60, and early M1 Abrams all emphasized these same qualities. German military theorist Heinz Guderian, father of Blitzkrieg, wrote in his memoirs, "We made the perfect tank. The Americans made the tank that won the war." There's a lesson in that for all military planners. Perfect is the enemy of good enough, especially when good enough can be produced in overwhelming numbers. The memorial at Omaha Beach today includes a preserved Sherman tank from the 743rd Tank Battalion. Its hull still bears scars from German shells. French civilians regularly place flowers on it, remembering liberation. The inscription reads, "To those who came in steel coffins to give us freedom." It's a fitting tribute to citizen soldiers who climbed into imperfect tanks and made them superior through courage, innovation, and sacrifice. In the final analysis, the Sherman's success at Normandy wasn't about armor thickness or gun caliber. It was about American industry producing 1,000 tanks monthly. It was about farm boys from the Midwest maintaining complex machinery under fire. It was about tactical innovations like the Rhino hedge cutter transforming battlefield dynamics overnight. Most fundamentally, it was about the democratic arsenal proving that quantity possesses a quality all its own. The numbers tell everything. In June 1944, Germany had approximately 1,500 operational tanks on all fronts. America alone produced 2,000 Shermans that single month. By August, Allied forces in Northwest Europe fielded 4,000 tanks. German forces had fewer than 500. The mathematics of industrial warfare had rendered tactical superiority irrelevant. The Tiger might win individual battles, but the Sherman had already won the war. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who argued for positioning panzer reserves near the beaches, was proven correct in his assessment. In papers discovered after his forced suicide in October 1944, he had written, "The Americans will come with thousands of tanks. Not better than ours, but thousands. We cannot stop thousands. The war is lost when the first American tank rolls off the beach." On June 6, 1944, at 06:29 hours, the first Sherman tanks of Company A, 743rd Tank Battalion, rolled off the beach at Normandy. The war in the West was effectively decided at that moment, though hundreds of thousands would die before its conclusion. The Sherman tank, imperfect and mass-produced, manned by citizen soldiers, had broken the Atlantic Wall and begun the liberation of Europe. The legacy of those 12 hours on June 6th would influence military doctrine for generations. Every major military would study Normandy's lessons and conclude that in modern warfare, industrial capacity, logistical superiority, and tactical adaptation matter more than technical specifications. In the depths of Norman soil, German tanks still rest where they fell. Tigers and Panthers, engineering marvels representing the pinnacle of 1940s tank design, slowly rusted away. Their crews, some of history's most experienced tank soldiers, died manning weapons that were individually superior but collectively insufficient. Both sides honored them for their skill and courage, but their sacrifice marked the end of an era when tactical superiority could overcome strategic disadvantage. The future belonged to nations capable of mass production, rapid innovation, and systematic combined arms warfare. The Sherman tank, for all its flaws, represented these qualities perfectly. It wasn't the best tank of World War II, but it was the tank that won World War II. In the arithmetic of modern warfare, that's the only statistic that matters.